years from now, Canada will look pretty different, according to demographers. About 25% of Canadians will be 65 years of age or older. For many financial advisors joining us here today, this future is actually already in the here and now, as they increasingly service aging clients, are dealing with aging in their own lives or in their own families. So what kind of impact is aging having on the financial advisor community? And how can advisors add more value today as the years go by? To help answer those questions and many more, I'm sure today, I'm pleased to be joined here by Laura Tamblyn-Watts. She is author of Let's Talk About Aging Parents, a real-life guide to solving problems with 27 essential conversations. Laura is the CEO of CanAge. This is Canada's National Seniors Advocacy Organization, and she teaches law and aging at the University of Toronto. A warm welcome to you.
Happy to be here.
Very delighted to have you here, and we'll invite everyone who's joining us here today to send their questions in over the next 30 minutes or so. I was fascinated reading your new book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
By the way. At some of the conclusions, wonderful topics to dig in. Some of the conclusions weren't as intuitive as I thought. There's a really great case for sort of a Golden Girls way of doing things as you age. Tell me what the Golden Girls is to you.
We may remember that television show back in the day where the three friends and the one mom move in together and they share expenses and they keep each other company and keep us laughing. And that kind of friendship-based model of housing is becoming increasingly exciting to people. It means that they can make things a little bit more affordable, but also keep those social connections alive. And that's really what keeps longevity a vibrant thing.
So, I mean, advisors are talking to families, they have their own families, they're in these situations themselves, and you've interviewed many, many people for this book and come across, okay, let's just deal with sort of the idea of isolation. We're going to move on to the financial sides of these things. But I would have thought, well, at one point, my mom will move in with me, and that will be perfect, and she'll love it. She might not love it. What did you find?
Mostly adults don't want to move in with their older children who have grown up. Mostly that actually isn't what they want. They want to have independence, but they want to be connected. They might want to live close to you, but they may not want to live in the house. And part of that is because people need more space and they need a little bit more time. I don't know about your household, but I have 3 kids all in a row and it's busy, busy, busy nonstop. And that can be a little chaotic. So we see people really wanting to move in, often with their friends, or sometimes having intergenerational relationships. So you might have someone like a grad student move in and help around the house in exchange for some lowered rent.
Interesting. It's so interesting. So maybe like your book club, we all buy a house together and get some help.
Absolutely. You buy a big, beautiful house and each of you have a wing, more like Downton Abbey. Think about it that way.
It's sounding better and better. Let's start now. Part 1 of your book tackles many different areas. The one I want to bring up, though, is does my parent need to downsize their possessions? So this is before we get to Downton Abbey. This is before we get to the Golden Girls situation. This is in the home that they're in. The downsizing question, actually, it's extremely emotional. I've gone through small bits of this. Everyone has. Getting rid of stuff and things that have accrued over a lifetime can be heart-wrenching. What do you suggest we all do about this?
So I just did this. As a matter of fact, I literally just moved from the big family house, so I can speak about it as well. And I was also just at my parents' house. Every time I go to my parents' house, I leave with some heirloom or something, and I think that's really important. But what it speaks to is that people want their memories and their experiences acknowledged. It really is about that. So what I would say first is to get a couple of bins of a no questions asked safe zone, right? Doesn't matter what it is, you get to put it, but it's about as much space as it is. The second thing is you have to question to yourself, why are you downsizing? So if you're downsizing because they think they have too much stuff, can it just go in the basement?
I mean, too big a house.
Or it's too big a house. So what's the right size question? You know, many parents think, I need to downsize, but what you're trying to get at is, what are you worried about? Are you worried that really you need to move and you have to be ready to do it? Are you thinking that you're overwhelmed by stuff and it's not safe, like you need to be able to move and physically there's too many things? So we need to get at that. What is the anxiety behind it? And then we can find the right response.
Is it, and so that idea of simplifying life, maybe it doesn't involve moving, but there is sort of this idea of things just have to become easier. We can't have quite so many things on the calendar and so much, well, maybe stuff, I don't know. It's
Well,
all.
I think that's exactly it. You have to find what makes your individual parent feel uplifted and vibrant and connected. And then the stuff has to flow from that, right? There's nothing wrong with stuff. If your dad is still playing hockey at 75, and lots of Canadian dads are playing hockey, I hope lots of Canadian moms are too, but still a bit gendered back in that, then don't give away the hockey gear. Like, that's not a thing that you need to be giving away. So think to make sure that things make sense. But if you have a shed full of stuff that you're never using anymore, bikes and roller skates and whatever that they're not using, then find where those could go to a good place in a space. Are they holding on to it because it's just too overwhelming to open the shed? For lots of us, I think that's a real thing. And do they want that for some other purpose? Maybe to move some extra things into that shed. So problem solve based on what their life is and what's blocking their well-being.
Sometimes it's better not for the, going into my own biography here, for the daughter to suggest that you need to do things. I try to bring all financial advisors into this. They become sort of a neutral person often in the family wealth discussion. This is not about clearing out the garage. Obviously, we don't need more on financial advisors' shoulders. But just that idea of an objective person. Does that sort of help?
The third party kind of financial advisor, as we know, can often become a social worker, a counselor,
oh my goodness,
a marriage therapist,
yes,
kind of thinking about succession planning. And what we're trained in the financial sector to do, and actually what some of the things that come to you are not always the same. So one of the reasons I wrote the book is that financial advisors or other third-party professionals, health advisors, can kind of like hear, and you can read off the same page. What that can lead back to is, okay, you're thinking about downsizing. What's that wealth management piece for me? And then what are we paying attention to? Because you don't want to end up in a fight with your daughter who also happens to be your power of attorney.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Okay, there's a lot of different pieces in there. You mentioned the club sandwich generation, 6 generations. So I was thinking 1 or 2. Why 6?
6 generations.
What do you mean by this?
Person in their mid-90s, very common. Largest group of people who are demographically shifting are people over the age of 100. Remember the Queen used to write you a letter when you got to 100 because it was such a big deal? Well, the poor king would never have a chance to do anything except write letters because it's now becoming quite the norm. My kids who are in their 20s can well expect to be over 100. So we have to think about our longevity stretching. So people in their 90s have kids, early 70s, have kids, 50s, late 40s, have kids, mid-20s, have kids, again, in early years. And that's only if our generations are spaced that far apart. So we're no longer that sandwich generation where it's I'm taking care of my older adults, I'm taking care of my kids. No, you're taking care of your grandkids and your great-grandparents.
And you've written this book from ages what to what? Really the audience for this book?
35 to 75.
Okay,
really.
Okay, because you're looking both directions.
That's it. You think about how many books we have for pregnancy, 9 months. It felt longer than 9 months for me, but they told me it was only 9 months, right? Yes. Then you have your first year baby books. How many baby books do we have? Toddler books, preschool books. Altogether, that's maybe 6 years. What we're thinking about is what do you do for that 40 years where you're actually thinking about, and again, I use the word aging parents and adult children as slang.
Yeah,
really.
We're all aging, everyone, no matter where you are.
It is. And whatever relationship you're having, could be aunt, uncle, godmother, neighbor, family of choice, but this is who we are and we need to get better at having these conversations.
How about the conversations about technology? We don't need to go too far into this, but I mean, everyone has a grandparent or a grandpal of some sort who's been scammed. I mean, it happens all the time, and it really preys on those that are lonely, which goes back to our initial discussion of perhaps friends get together and live and age in place, in a place where they have friendships and conversations and so on. Scammers aim for those who are vulnerable and lonely. Tell us a little bit about this. What is the conversation that perhaps an advisor or really a child has with their parent about this?
The first, own up to the fact that we can't make this about stigma, right? Yes, it may be a bit more convincing if you're older and you're not as used to the scams, but actually everyone I know has been scammed. Everyone's been scammed, right? I bought something on Facebook Marketplace. It was a scam, and so it's one of these things that we need to bring out of the closet. You can say, oh, I did that thing the other day where I answered to something and it turned out to be something else. Oh, I feel like an idiot, but oh well. Or I'm getting a predatory set of calls, Mom. Have you ever had those kinds of phone calls? And if you open up the conversation, or you're an advisor and you say, listen, I got to tell you, a lot of these scams have financial banners, right? So if you ever see something from Fidelity that doesn't look right, make sure to give me a call. That personal connection is what people want anyway. What's confusing is when you have both a trend to online financing, whether you're doing your online banking or investments or whatever it is, and then at the same time, the scams are doing that. So it's an opportunity for the financial advisor to make sure that you have a personal connection.
For sure.
And that is maybe the most productive thing at all.
Yeah, no, it's the antidote to the concerns about some of the online scams. Tell us how you came at this in terms of researching. You trained as a lawyer, you teach law, and you are the CEO of this company. How did you come to this body of research in order to write this book, guide, piece of, information we all need to read?
So I've been working in the field of aging for about 25 years, and I ran the Canadian Centre for Elder Law, which is a law and aging kind of research and law reform think tank. I run Canada's National Seniors Advocacy Organization. I actually didn't want to write the book. I wanted someone to have already written the book.
Right.
Because when you hear these things, it's usually that tip of the iceberg question. I'm a bit worried about my mom. She's got this kind of, online romance thing going on. Ding, and your financial advisor should also be thinking about that too, because this is potentially a romance scam, one of the most successful scams there is. I'm worried because my dad's starting to not always respond back the same way. Ding, 7 to 10 years in Canada before you get a diagnosis of dementia. The first thing to go is abstract financial reasoning. So I wanted a book that actually put all of the right evidence-based information, but in a way that was kind of funny and that you could have just-in-time information.
There's some real giggles in this book, actually.
I hope
real
so.
Giggles. Yeah.
So it really is the right information, medical information, social science information, financial information, but done in a way that people at 3 a.m. can reach their bedside and open up that chapter when they're worried and go, okay, all right.
What about the 3 a.m. worries? Everyone has those.
Listen, the title of the book when I was writing it in my own head was The 3 a.m. Guide to Your Aging Parents, because that's when we're all up. Either you haven't been to sleep yet because you're up thinking about what's going on that you don't know. Mom fell last week and you only found out about it when you happened to drop in and you realized she had a black eye and her hip was wherever. Or you're really worried because your dad's husband has had some type of a crisis, and you're stuck there worrying. But guess what? They're up too.
Yeah, they're up to. So phone them.
Phone them. You can phone them, and they're up for lots of reasons. And some of those reasons are really problematic because if you don't get sleep, everything else kind of falls apart.
It's worse. Yeah. No, absolutely. I know. So the scourge. Then we could talk about screens. We won't, though, because we're going to stay on course. I'm going to ask you about something in part 3 of the book. Why is my parent getting divorced now? This is sort of the gray divorce discussion. Happens a lot for lots of different reasons. What do you want to pull out of this to highlight to advisors?
So there's a couple of things that you need to know. First of all, you have to understand the dynamic of it. And there's many different kinds of gray divorces.
For sure.
There's the gray divorce where I just can't stand them any longer. This is the rest of my life. I've looked at it. He's on the chair watching Jeopardy, yelling at the TV. I want to go hike Machu Picchu. Like, I just can't stand it anymore. And that divorce, advisors need to be able to identify, because it does mean that they're going to have different financial needs, and they're going to have to think about things like,
it's cheaper to sit on the couch and watch Jeopardy.
It's cheaper to sit on the couch and watch Jeopardy. But often there's one person that's decided, I'm going to take the last part of my longevity and do something different. And so when they're thinking about what those divisions are in terms of insurance policies, term policies, what that's going to mean for disability, what that's going to mean for pension division upon marriage breakdown, you really also have to think about what's their vision for their future lives. Could be quite different. There's the one, of course, the yoga instructor, the 26-year-old yoga instructor. I mean, we all, I think, have seen a version of that.
Yeah.
And, it could be that he really does want at 85 to marry the 26-year-old yoga instructor. But often there's some questions you need to ask about that. And the kids are not going to be happy, right? You've got to be thinking.
Right. And if they're your clients as well, you're stuck in it. Yeah.
You really need to think about who's your client in this regard. Because if it's
who is your client in this? Advisors know. But what do you think?
Well, I think you have to be very clear, particularly if all of a sudden you're going to have some adverse interests. If the new wife is going to be thinking about things in a very different way, and she's really signing up to inherit the house, inherit like the cottage, inherit all of those glorious rifts and other things that are hanging around. Like that's the right of the older person, as long as they have the mental capacity to make those decisions, as long as they're not under any kind of undue influence, and that you have to unpack.
Right.
If the kids are saying, look, this is a real problem and we're quite worried, this is where you're going to need independent legal advice, and you really need to make sure that you are figuring out how to ethically represent different parties, particularly in a breakdown.
As in, the financial advisor would want to check in with some legal advice.
There's no question about
for
that.
For their own protection.
For their own protection.
For their own protection.
And there may be things as well that you can talk with your wealth management colleagues around, things like trusts, for instance, that you may be able to imagine. And families don't necessarily know about those. And that's a great place where a financial advisor can connect with an estate manager or somebody who's doing estates. Usually the way in is through taxes. Actually, not about the marriage breakdown. We're like, okay, Dad, I understand that we're doing this. How do we make sure we're doing tax optimization? That's often a very gentle way around the what in heaven's name are you doing thing that's in your head.
Okay, got it. So that's a conversation you can bring up once a year at the end of April. Okay, brilliant. Question coming in. Let's take this as we go. So how do you take care of an aging parent who lives on the other side of the country?
Yes.
That's tough.
And that is exactly what most people are doing. If you live out of province in this country, 2,100 kilometers is the average between an adult child and their aging parent. And if you're in the provinces, our provinces are mostly big, okay, with the exception of sort of PEI, but 400 kilometers is quite usual. Look, I think there's a couple of different things. One, you've got to figure out who's on your team. So are there community-based social services that you can have? Check your instinct of, I want to move you into my basement. I'm going to move you across the country. Check your instincts that might come from a very loving place. But what we know is when people are moved across the country and they don't have connections there, they actually do very poorly.
They do very poorly.
Very badly.
Okay. It's one of because you think that's a loving thing to do, get them closer to you. You got to work, you got to whatever.
Now, if they're moving back to Calgary and they knew Calgary before and you're living in Calgary, okay, it's probably a better scenario because they have relationships, they know their way around. Right. But if they have lived in one place and then they're going to move to somewhere where they don't have any connections, that is one of those triggers for ill health and loneliness. So what you're going to try to think is, who's there? What community social services are there? What technologies can you use? And you got to build a bit of a plan. Yeah. You may need to hire some people, and you may be doing things like maybe you should be, having a Golden Girls or a home share environment. What is it that they want in their life to achieve, and then work towards it, rather than us instinctively saying, Mom, you're going to come. It's time, you're going to come. That never works out.
That never works out. See, I find that counterintuitive just because it would seem, without doing the research that you've done, kind, to have your mom move or whatever. Like, it doesn't seem like the wrong decision.
No, it seems like a place of flow. What I will say is this, think about warming up the pot. Right? Yeah. If you've got a cold water pot, right, where they live right now, it's chilling, and there's a hot, what you want to do is mix a little bit. Have Mom come for 2 weeks. Maybe they're dog sitting the neighbor's house.
Right.
Maybe they come a little bit in the summer when it's nice. Maybe they start joining that pickleball club that they like around the corner. And they start making those connections so it becomes that other place that they live. Then it's easier to do the shift as opposed to the big shift all at once.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, I'm going to ask that question. There's lots of questions coming in, which is great. If we take a look, part 4 has many different topics within it, but this one I'll ask you about. So what aging-related medical issues should we watch out for if they're going through a major health issue, which is going to happen to most people?
Cognitive impairment, of course, is the biggest worry. That's the 3 a.m. one. But important to remember that just because someone has some cognitive impairment doesn't mean it's dementia.
And it doesn't mean the rest of their life doesn't continue.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. I mean, what we're looking for is not, I can't find my keys for the car. I can never find my keys for the car.
It's universal.
That's universal. It's, I'm sitting in the car holding the keys and I don't know what they're for.
Right, different,
very different type of experience. You might look for what kind of that word searching, right? Now, it's natural in the brain as we age to have a bit of a harder time finding nouns. And there's a big conversation about menopause on that too. That's not what we're talking about. It's
nouns, right?
Nouns,
it's nouns.
searching for nouns.
Not verbs.
Who's that person who did the thing over there by the, right? Like nouns. That's actually okay.
That's awesome.
It's when you actually get your words mixed up that we're starting to be concerned about. Fundamentally, you're looking for things like delirium.
Yep.
So it may not be dementia. It could be just a urinary tract infection or a bladder infection. They need some sulfa drugs, some cranberry juice. They're going to get better. And post-surgical delirium is a big one. People say, well, I didn't have surgery. I'm just, well, did you have, that big root canal a couple months ago?
Right.
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it can last up to 6 months.
Gosh.
So really paying attention to that medication management. Taking meds that conflict with each other. So take them all in the plastic bags and look for the meds that are hidden around the house, right? The ones above the stove, right? The ones in the bedside table, all of those. And then have a look, take a picture of the fridge, the inside of your fridge. Because when you go to your pharmacist, you're going to want to show them. They're going to look for things like grapefruit juice, which has an enzyme that will undo
some of the drugs.
That's it.
Oh yeah, I've heard that.
Right. So you want to take a picture of what else is on the shelf, those particular supplements, B3, whatever, those can also interfere and cause some confusion. So let's not start immediately by thinking about dementia, but let's do a review. And then really, really important, a lot of the things people think about cognitive impairment is actually problems hearing and seeing.
Yeah, I was just going to say hearing and seeing. Okay, so let's go to seeing. You and I were talking about this in a prep discussion about macular degeneration, which lots of people will suffer from, but just the idea of having fonts larger, just so people feel like they can actually read, I don't know, everything from instructions on the back of the box to everything.
Me too.
Everything.
I can't go to a restaurant anymore and read the menu, and I think it's important for people to remember, it's not just you. The average size of font anyone can read is 14.
Right.
So think about it from going on from there. If you're an advisor and you have materials and it's less than 14 point, throw it out and start again.
Interesting.
Give them also maybe a tablet where you can zoom in and up. If you're an advisor and you're sitting at a table, we often sit across from each other. If you've got someone from macular degeneration, I can see between 9 and 10 and 2 and 3. So a round table will let that person with macular degeneration see you because they can't see right in front of your face.
Right. Another question coming in, blended families.
Oh, yes.
Blended families, more challenges there certainly because there are more people to deal with. So again, the advisor is there overseeing this. What did they pull in as some help for them?
The book has got a whole chunk on it for a purpose because I don't expect an advisor to be a social worker and start off and say, tell me how your stepdaughter really
and try and work it all.
Right?
Yeah.
We can't do that. So the book goes through how to have some of those conversations. But I will say this, blended families are often not as blended as we think they are. And they rarely last beyond a person's illness. Now, not necessarily death, although often that's the families may drift in the estate. And that's something that advisors really need to help for. What's it going to be like? Oh, of course they'll stay close to get. No, maybe they won't, right? You have to be. But if someone has got cognitive impairment or there's a decision maker, if you've got somebody where there's that underlying friction and they're close by, you can know that that's going to be a red flag. So you really have to do some what if conversations.
For sure.
What if? And one of the things I'm a huge fan of really is actually having a financial institution be the executor or be that substitute decision maker for finance. You can't do it for health and personal care.
Yeah.
But you can have the trust company or the executor-based services be that substitute decision maker. Stop the fighting before it starts and have a neutral third party.
Yeah, and that's why they exist.
That's why they exist. And I think that they are going to be the most important thing that advisors can remind people of. So you don't actually have to choose between your daughter and your stepdaughter. You can actually have this trust company do it professionally.
Tell us what you've seen over the years we might come back to that. We'll see if another question comes in, but that was beautifully said and it's what a lot of people are going through. There's no question. What about the concerns around elder abuse? Elder abuse can happen in many different ways. There's obviously the physical, horrific things that you hear about and read about, and I'm sure people have experience with witnessing it in some manner. But what are you talking about mostly when you're talking about it in this book? And again, that advisors have some agency on, because they're not going to be able to deal with everything.
Look, it's really important. We have an ethical obligation. And when you look at who's governing our rulings, that there's some really important guidance coming out from the regulators around paying attention to these particular issues and making sure that you've got an up-chain reporting. So if you're a kind of a solo or small practice, you've got to make sure that you've got some reporting or some specialized conduct protocols to do with it. If you're a very large company, you probably have those built in, but you have to watch for those red flags. So it's important to remember that where there is financial abuse, which is actually the second most common form of elder abuse, not the first. There's
What's
almost
the first?
It's that psychological and emotional abuse. And it's actually almost more damaging than any other kind of thing about, we talk about bullying for kids, but actually that emotional leverage leads to undue influence, which leads to being forced to sign powers of attorney, put on joint accounts and those things. Start looking for that unsuccessful son in the basement that's showing up at the financial institution. Start looking for the new best friend or that caregiver that's now moved in and sudden changes in wills, beneficiaries, sudden changes in insurance policies, all of those things. Remember, advisors and other third parties too have an obligation to meet their client individually. And that doesn't mean with them, the potential abuser or the new best friend, behind the palm tree.
Right.
You actually have to take some time. And if you think that there's abuse here, you got to buy some time, and you don't actually have to move on it immediately. So time is your friend in this regard. How prevalent? 1 in 6 seniors will be abused. 1 in 6. And if we extrapolate from the US numbers, $2.75 billion a year is what we estimate a loss in Canada for elder financial exploitation.
Oh my gosh, that's brutal. For advisors coming into the role, this will be the final question, we've got a minute or so. There's an argument there. A lot of the advisors there aren't a lot of new advisors coming in, basically, because it seems like a really big job, right? Advisors have a lot of different things they have to think about, but it's also a very special place to be because you are involved in families, and it's sort of an intimate relationship dealing with money and families and so on. So I was just wondering if you had a tip for those that may be thinking about going into this as a career choice. What would you see ultimately as sort of the benefits of it?
People right now are looking for advisors across their own longevity. And so this is an opportunity for current advisors to be thinking about their succession planning, because they don't want to have that jarring disconnection when they retire and have nobody to pass things on to. I think that there's a really interesting opportunity for people to have that lifelong set of relationships, that trusted advisor role that we always used to think about. And that means you need to know people. And so when I wrote, Let's Talk About Aging Parents, those essential conversations, I hope, are ways I can facilitate knowing people. But it's a great job to be in, and one that really is in service to families across this country.
Well, thank you for writing it, Laura Tamblyn-Watts. A joy to speak with you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.